welcome to this last panel of the day. I mean, was really a very intense round of debates today we already had. I'm Claudia Detsch. I'm head of the Competence Center for Climate and Social Justice of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. We are based in Brussels. The Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung is a German foundation associated with the social democracy. And in our competence center, we are working on climate and social justice in the whole OSCE area, so not only in the European Union. Yes, as I said, we have 2 days of intense and exciting debates are already behind us. And when I prepared for this moderation, I really thought, if the audience would feel like affected by these debates, if these debates have reinforced the feeling often that we are approaching an apocalypse tomorrow. I think the weather, for sure, of the last 2 days tried to make a statement in this direction here. But of course, we put a question mark on this part of our title, and quite deliberately. Because, I mean, the challenges are immense, but of course, we are also sure that we have solutions and pathways at hand. And that's what we want to talk about in this panel, challenges of the climate crisis for human security and for social justice. Yeah, two topics really closely intertwined. The issue of climate change as a threat to security features quite prominently in the whole program. Yeah, I mean, we talked today already about the return of hunger, the water crisis, loss and damage, etc. Yeah? And I think a few years ago, this might have caused some astonishment at first glance. Yeah, also especially this connection between security and climate change. But of course, this changed massively in recent years, and not least because of the weather phenomena we are seeing all over the place. So what are the risks? What are the connections to these issues of safety and security, and also of social justice? And I think it's really quite important in those days, yeah, not to remain in kind of a disaster mode. Yeah, sometimes looking at the news, one is a bit at risk of this, but we don't want to do this here. We have to be prepared for what is coming. We really have to work hard to tackle those challenges ahead of us, and especially when it comes to security and social justice. But therefore we want to focus here on what needs to be done, what is already being done, what good experiences can be built on, and of course who can drive these changes, and what alliances and partnerships we need in order to do so. So I'm pleased that we have an excellent panel here to talk about these issues. And I'm going to present the panelists in alphabetical order, starting to my right here is Niels Annen. He's Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. And prior to this, Niels was Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office. So I think here also we have an interesting interface between climate change as a security risk, maybe more before, and now I guess it's, of course, also about global justice, a lot what you are doing. Then to my left, we have Lučka, Kajfež Bogataj. She's a researcher and professor at the Department of Agronomy and chair of Agrometeorology and Agricultural Land Management at the Biotechnical faculty at the University of Ljubljana here in Slovenia. And she has been a member of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the famous IPCC, for more than 16 years. We have Maria Laura da Rocha. She is Secretary General of Foreign Affairs in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Brazil. And this was a last-minute change we had here on the panel, but I already told her I'm quite happy that we have her here not only because I used to work in the Ebert Foundation in the Latin American department for 15 years, so I always enjoy this, but also because I think it's really quite important that we have a voice from the Global South in such a panel, and I mean more so as Brazil is really a very powerful voice of the Global South. And so to talk here also about the possibilities and challenges maybe of the international cooperation. And last but not least, we have Annen Linde, former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, and she was in this position also chairperson of the OSZE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And during this period, there was this ground-breaking decision taken to really take on the challenges caused by climate change for security into the agenda. So this is also a very interesting perspective I think we can bring on here. So how do we want to proceed? I thought we are going to start here with 1 or 2 rounds of questions here on the panel, but of course would like to have the audience also coming on board in the conversation with questions, comments, doubts, suggestions later on, and we have a micro here available. So to start, Lučka, I would really like to start with you. I mean, you are the scientific voice here, so quite used, I think, maybe for decades, the profession here ringing the alarm bells, about the consequences of climate change, the variety of consequences. So I think it was only understandable if there was a position right now, a bit of, we told you so. But of course the message did not go through for quite a long time. And now we have all this weather phenomena here, also in our region, in Europe, but also around the globe, of course. So you think that this issue of climate change as a security risk, as bad as it is, but is it serving maybe right now as kind of a band-aid to make people more aware of really the risks and the consequences of climate change, and that we have to act? And a bit then related to this, in your opinion, is the problem now getting sufficiently addressed in politics? Did the message go through?
Yeah, climate change actually is accelerating a bit, so even we are surprised how fast things develop, and of course the most prominent evidence of climate change are extreme events that are really causing harm, and they also increase this feeling of insecurity. So actually people now do understand that it's not climate change is not some environmental problem, that is really a problem connected with food, with security in general. So yes, situation is helping, but at the same time, I guess what we observed, we knew that before, that climate change development is extremely unjust, because we have this justice in our panel. And to put it very bluntly or simply, our message used to be that climate change is unjust because when already, for instance, not enough water, it would be even less water. When already too much water, it will be even more. And people who are poor will actually get poorer, and rich may get richer. So it is extremely unjust, and this is also what brings not alarm, but especially with young people, they do have this sense that climate change is much more than just a simple environmental issue. And what is also probably important in this, also in this forum, Great Strategic Forum, and in general, that we don't see much progress in climate change mitigation. There are promises, there will be meetings, there will be commitments, etc. But the fact is that CO2 concentration is getting bigger every minute. So we don't see any real action or something that would say that climate change in the future will be less some projections which are now very black scenarios will not come true. So all these pieces of mosaic are there, and the feeling of urgency is mounting, yes. But not because our warnings, but because what is reality out there.
Notice. Okay, so you say the feeling of urgency, yes, that's there, but the action is missing.
It's missing. Everything that happened in the global geopolitics is suddenly more important than climate change. I don't want to minimize the Ukraine situation, but you know, everybody's talking about that, not.
Okay, this is actually a question I have for our colleagues from political corner later on. And for you personally, what's most frightening when you look at the region? What might be coming here?
Well, if you talk about Europe and we talk about this particular area, there are a lot of things going on in the Western Balkans or in the south of Southern Europe. I guess this is the area where climate change will be extremely much, I would say, with much severe consequences than the others. So I'm worried for this particular area of Europe, which has already had other problems, not just climate change, but all things will put together will be really not a pleasant situation.
Okay. And I mean, in the past, many wars, of course, were fought over the access to fossil fuels, mainly oil. You think there's really a risk that climate change can be the driver of wars and really conflicts to come in the future, or would this be an exaggeration?
Well, water wars are known for a long time. They are not called that way in many places, but if you just look at a situation close to here, actually, when the problems with water are chronicle, the North Africa to India, Pakistan. So these are areas that may come as an issue, but I don't believe in conflicts. I believe that we have enough time and wisdom to negotiate before we run out of water.
But what you mentioned, for example, this is then existing conflicts which are very much accelerated by.
Yeah, this is maybe some message or something that you should remember, that climate change always acts as a magnifying glass. You have a small problem that you did not solve in the past, but with climate change it gets bigger. It gets closer, and you have to deal it. But maybe if you wouldn't do mistakes in the past, it would not exist. So that is maybe the most, how should I say, the best way forward. Let's try to solve the problems we have from before, and then climate change adaptation and mitigation will be easier.
Okay. And Maria, Laura, if one looks at Latin America from the outside, it's really amazing. You have few interstate conflicts, in Latin America, and I think this might be like the region with less conflicts. I mean, we hoped and we tend to think in Europe that this was true for us as well. Of course, now we have a war here going on, but nevertheless, there are also threats, of course, coming now from climate change, and when it is about human security, and of course social justice as well. So from your perspective, which might be like the most urging threats here?
So we believe that there will be no climate justice if you do not look to the people who suffer the most the climate change effects. There will be no climate justice without social inclusion and the reduction of hunger, poverty, and inequalities. The path to eradicating hunger needs an integrated approach, as Brazil sees the question, which intersects with realizing goals in health, education, climate action, biodiversity, and so on. Brazil has always recognized the intricate links between food production, sustainability, economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. The vision of a sustainable food production, distribution, and consumption system is central to achieve zero hunger. That was our goals in 2030 agenda, including climate change commitments. Agriculture and agri-food system may be part of the solution to address climate change and biodiversity losses. We have a plan in Brazil. We did it before, now we are doing more, called the ABC Plan Plus. It's a plan for climate adaptation and low carbon emission in agriculture, for example. It promotes technologies and practices that reduce carbon emissions while supporting adaptation measures. We did this before, and the government succeeded, the previous President Lula government succeeded to take off the Brazil from the hunger map of FAO. And of course, when you have political decisions, thinking another way, we had a question like Brazil lived. We are the biggest, one of the biggest food producers, and we got back more than 30 million people with hunger. So we try to improve, to make it better, our plans that used before and prove that it's possible, to integrate both the familia. For instance, you give money for a family in the conditions to permit the family to have food, and the food becomes used, consumed from regional producers, and we can have a food program for feed the students and things like that. And at the same time, using technology, cooperation, technology transfer to ameliorate, to improve our production systems. The biggest one without disturbing their environment. And that's this ABC plan. Plus, it's a very important, very interesting thing we are doing in this field.
Absolutely, yeah, and I mean, Voice of Familia, this was really a lighthouse project back in the time, I'd say. So I think it's also interesting to look at this from other countries. You mentioned technology transfer and cooperation, so I guess that's also like in the relationship to the industrialized countries. So what are some, when we talked before, I said core demands here to the global north, and you told me that's not our way to approach it. We are not having demands, but then maybe like suggestions to the global north here to mention maybe. So
no, the demands that everyone has to do the work we agreed before. So we have an agenda, we have NDCs, we have a time to do the things, and we all are very back. We are not, we are very far from the mains, the objectives we put it. So we have to do more, and we have to start at a very important action in this field, because people are suffering, we are suffering, and all over the world nobody's it's free from this severe changes in the climate that we see, and my solidarity with Slovenia. I had the opportunity to talk with the colleagues for the problems you have, but we are going to have having problems all over the world, and you have to start action and find the ways to have the right production, food for everybody, and not going against the environment. Respect the environment. It's possible. New technologies, the green economy, everything is under the table, and you have to distribute the possibilities all over the world. All nations has to participate in these things.
So maybe Niels, then I would like to come to you here. I mean, these are very turbulent times in the field of development and cooperation as well, I'd say, and Europe, of course, is slowly but surely, or maybe not so slowly, realizing that it needs to change its relations to the global south as well. Yeah, I mean, various signs point to this, and especially I think it was quite interesting last year after the Russian invasion to Ukraine that many Europeans were maybe a bit surprised that there was not more support for our position and especially also for the sanctions regime, etc. And of course, when we talk about it, even like in our own foundation with our local colleagues, we have offices in more than 100 countries of the world, and so our colleagues told us immediately, and also the partner, of course, yeah, but this is a conflict going on now in your region. Normally you are not so totally interested in the conflicts going on in our regions neither, and of course then also the COVID pandemic was mentioned immediately, and this issue of vaccines, etc. So I think this was one thing. Also something which caught a lot of attention was the BRICS summit last week, and really this huge interest by the countries of the global south to get on board here. So, as I said, we are now talking a lot, and especially in Germany, I think, of this famous auf Augenhöhe, yeah, equal footing or eye-to-eye level. We have to really change our partnerships with the global south. So, what would you say, where are we when we talk about this, between the rhetorical side of it and the more practical?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and it's not an easy question to answer, but I do think, first of all, if you look at what German cooperation did, development cooperation, over many, many years, we invested in societies, in relationships. Of course, there's a technical part to development cooperation, because at the end of the day, talk is important, but then the implementation is the real proof. So there's a technical level, but if you invest in a water sector in a poorer country, if you invest in education, especially vocational training where Germany has some experience to share, you build relationships. So what we see right now in those times of geopolitical tensions, and I think that's true for the least developed countries, but it's also true for middle-income countries, and we have partnerships with both of those groups of countries, that in those times of geopolitical tensions, we can build on that trust. And that's sometimes an overlooked advantage of development cooperation, because we usually don't take center stage. So as you see, I'm sitting on the margin here, which is okay, I'm happy to do. So I think many people in Berlin, I wouldn't say discover the value of our development cooperation, but maybe in a way they discover the value of that. And so I'm representing here our government, but it's not a secret that I'm a social democrat. We always believed in international cooperation. So I think for Chancellor Scholz to manage the crisis with Russia and to build reliable relationships with leaders of the global south doesn't came as anything unnatural to him, all the contrary. Maria, we talked about our relationship. We resumed the funding of the Amazon Fund. The Chancellor went to Brazil. He used the G7 presidency of Germany to invite leaders from all over the world. And what I believe is important, that it's not one meeting and a photo op. It's really engaging on the leaders level, but also between the governments. And that's what's needed. And quite frankly, we do not always agree on every bullet point, but we recognize and we accept that there is a narrative which has some justification. And the world is changing, like it or not. We have always been fighting for a more just world order, but as long as your country and your region is dominating that world order, that's an easy sentence to say. But now we see that that things are really changing. However, we are sometimes surprised that the impact that Russia's war of aggression has on the international rules-based order, we believe sometimes have been and still is going to be underestimated in the global south. But then we have to talk about it. Times of lecturing is over. And I think if you see what we did with the question of global food prices, the initiatives that we launched, a global alliance for food security and other things, that's sometimes a more convincing argument. And I'm very encouraged to see that leaders like President Lula, that leaders like the South African president, African leaders, even in Moscow, are raising the question of the Black Sea grain agreement that Russia now has terminated. So things are moving, but we cannot treat that as a tactical move, because it's not. It's adapting our instruments, our policies towards the new world order, and we believe that we have good arguments with our friends to make the case for a rules-based order. And here we are.
Excuse me, but it's just too tempting for me being here, and I have to say I'm totally convinced that what we also have to do is a bit bring or streamline maybe the different policy areas, and having then Brazil and also Europe here on the panel. I mean, we are talking about this Mercosur EU trade agreement right now, but here, for example, we have then in very practical terms different assumptions, you might say, because the Europeans are, there's a lot of pressure, you might say, from civil society, which says, okay, this might be harming to the Amazon if it goes through like this. So they talked about an amendment now in order to protect the Amazon better. But of course, then we see that the partners in the Mercosur countries say, hey, but this and what President Lula, for example, said, okay, if we are talking here about a relationship between partners, can't be that one partner here is maybe harmed. So how do we resolve this? And I think we have in Europe, we are going to face a lot of challenges of this sort in the future.
Yeah, but there's an interesting aspect to that debate, because first of all, I think for many reasons, for the protectionist tendencies in the economy, world economy, because of geopolitical pressures, we need Mercosur. We are convinced, and we encourage that our Brazilian friends make clear statements toward that. No, we have a relatively small window, time frame to get it done. And then it's interesting because, I think we in Europe believe that it was the right thing to do to pass a directive to ban products which were produced on illegally destroyed territory where illegally deforestation took place. So I think our intention is and was to protect the Amazon basin. But we did not, in the case of Brazil, we did not really have a counterpart with President Bolsonaro's government. So there was not a dialogue about that. So now some of the environmental activists in Europe are surprised that this, if I get it right, that's not particularly welcome in Brazil, because it's seen as a measure to protect the European markets. How to solve it? We cannot solve it on that podium, I guess, but we need to talk about it. And I think the lesson is, and it was difficult with Bolsonaro, close to impossible, but the lesson is we need to, have a structural dialogue with our partners. I think it's a good directive, but we need to accept that there are different views on that. Now we have political leadership on both sides. And we saw that the Brazilian government acted in a very decisive way to protect the Amazon, and I think there are opportunities. We talked about sustainably produced products from the Amazon basin. That can generate a market in Europe. So, but then we need to be willing to let those products into our market, which is also not always possible. So it's not always only the other ones, it's also us. So as I said, it's a complex issue, many interests are involved, and I think very well organized interests in Brazil in the agricultural sector as well. But we talk, and that's a good sign.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this would be a really breakthrough of the panel we could resolve this year. But this is also something you mentioned, yeah, the possibilities here then of ecological agriculture, etc. But I have to say, I'm really curious to see if we are going to reach this breakthrough until the end of the year. I think this was a bit the hope of on both sides. And the Swedish government, to which you belonged, had a reputation of avant-garde, yeah, in some policy areas. For example, it has shaped this strategy of feminist foreign policy, and of course it also gave special relevance to the topic of climate justice as part of foreign policy as well. But in your time as foreign minister, you yourself pointed out that we must not lose this momentum, yeah, that for the first time the adverse effects of climate change on human security have been recognized. And also here, coming back to something Lučka said, isn't this interim progress we saw then maybe 2-3 years ago already overshadowed by other issues, such as the war going on in Ukraine and the growing geopolitical tensions, or maybe to put it like the other way around, how do we manage to make progress on the climate agenda, on the agenda of climate justice, despite these adverse developments?
Well, thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you for mentioning the feminist foreign policy. The new government in Sweden is not having that anymore, but Germany has taken up the torch like a dozen other countries around the world, which of course is happy. And I'm happy that we have a panel with one man, because I've been to too many panels during this forum with just one woman. No, but to your question, for one thing, I mean, I was minister for nearly 7 years, both trade minister, EU minister, foreign minister, and I would say that the question of climate has gone from the periphery to being absolute core. And that is, even if it's a security policy, trade policy, development policy, social justice, climate is there now. So that is a change. A very viewable change, how climate has become issue in all and not just in a separate box. And I also would like to say that when you come to climate and security, let's take the Ukraine, because I don't agree totally with what Lučka is saying, because I think one thing that is very, very interesting and has not got enough attention is the peace plan put forward by President Zelensky. He did it at the United Nations General Assembly, then again in the G20 meeting, and also was saying, and I took with me what he said, because at point 8 in the 10-point plan is about ecocide, the need to immediately protect the environment, and he points out some of the devastating effects of the war in Ukraine. And I'm actually going to say exactly what he said, because I think it's very interesting. He said millions of hectares of forests were burned by shelling. Almost 200,000 hectares of our land are contaminated with unexploded mines and shells. Dozens of coal mines are flooded, including the mine in which an underground nuclear test explosion was carried out in '79. Thousands of hectares of soil are contaminated with harmful substances. Most of them are fertile soils, were fertile soils. End of his quote. And to address this, he decided to put up an international working group. And that working group is headed or chaired by the former, one of my predecessor, Mrs. Margot Wallström, who was also commissioner for 10 years, environmental commissioner, among other things, and his chief of staff, Andrei Yermak. And if there is someone here like me who has been visiting Zelensky in Ukraine, you know that Yermak is the guy. So putting him in charge together with Margot Wallström for the point 8 in the Zelensky peace plan, that shows how much importance it has. And what they should do is both to see what environmental harm is the war doing to Ukraine, and then to hold Russia accountable, and then to see, because in Ukraine and Russia there is a crime called ecocide. We don't have it in Sweden. We have a very hot debate if we should have it or not, but they have it in Ukraine. And ecocide means, of course, that you have destroyed the environment so much that it might not even recover. And I guess that discussion is the same in Brazil about ecocide. So I think that we should not put the attention to Ukraine war in adversity to climate. I think we should use it the other way around and use this. Then you mentioned about the OSCE, if I can just say some word about that, because there was of course a lot of difficulties during my period as chair of OSCE in 2021. But one thing that we managed to do was to take a groundbreaking decision that climate and security should now be a mandate of OSCE. They did not have a mandate before. OSCE is 57 countries. It's all European countries, it's the Central Asian countries, it's North America, Canada, and the US. And all of those 57 countries agreed that from now on OSCE should have the mandate to work with this. And we asked also the organization CIPRI, which is the Stockholm International Peace Institute, to do a study about climate and security, and it shows that there is so many hotspots in the whole area of OSCE where environmental issue and climate issue are the cause of or enhancing the conflict. And you know, when you are chair of OSCE, many times there start conflicts where they actually start to use military means. Most of the time it's not even in our media. And when you are a chairperson, you need to call the foreign ministers in the fighting countries, and you have to say, please don't shoot, please don't shoot at each other, could you please talk instead? So, for example, when this happened with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and I talked to them, please don't shoot at each other, but 20 people had already died in just a few days. And what was found out was that the core of the conflict was water. Because there was a discussion on who had the right to the water source that was on the borders. And it ended up with shooting and killing each other. And that happened again and again and again. And it was actually scarce resources, who has the right to the water, who has the right to the fertile soil, and so on, that created the conflicts. So climate has gone directly into the core of security policy.
This is going in the direction you mentioned before, yeah? But then this is, of course, a dire prospect in a way, yeah? Because we know, because of climate change, we are going to have these challenges even more severe in the future. So we really have to, yeah, as was already said, work quite hard in advance to prevent this conflict. And you said that the OSCE, as the word largest regional security organization has an important part here to play in finding, preventing and mitigating measures. But on the other hand, we all know that the OSCE right now also is like in a sort of crisis. So can turning the common agenda towards the climate crisis as a security risk here even be like part of a solution to this crisis of the organization, or is this rather an illusion?
I would say that that is to hope for too much, because OSCE is in deep crisis right now. But the issue of climate and security and the new mandate has been really taken care of by the Secretary General Helga, a German, very strong woman, and she has really made this one of the core issues. And she organized a big OSCE conference in July, just a few months ago, about this, with all the countries participating. Well, I guess not Russia, of course, but all the others. And they also discussed what should we do next. How do we find where the hotspots are, where we can, be working before it turns into military conflicts. And I think it's interesting what they discussed. One thing is to go from analyze to action. There are so many analyses now. We've done it before, but it needs to be action, and it need to be. We need to use the international organizations. And here I also see something that we started when Sweden had the place in the UN Security Council that Slovenia now has managed to get, which is very good. In 17 and 18, we invented a climate mechanism in the UN Security Council, meaning that before you put a proposal to the Security Council, you have to do analysis of the effects on the climate. And first there was, to be optimistic, a lukewarm reaction. Nobody thought this was very good. But since we were in the Security Council, that was one of the things we did. Now, several countries, Germany, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, has joined and put money into this mechanism. So now it's fully working, and I guess it's irreversible. Nobody will come now and say, okay, let's take it away, because now it has been established. So to use the international organization, not only for analysis, but for action. And then I also think the issue of accountability is more and more important. If we have this polluter pay principle, but this is on a much grander scale, that there need to be accountability for countries and action that are engaging in environmental warfare. And we need also then to educate people, for example at ICC and so on, in how do you ask for accountability if you don't have experts who knows what is something that has destroyed the earth so much, or has made it impossible to grow, because the fertile soil is no more any fertile soil, because it's contaminated in big areas. But then, just as we have when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence, that's another panel. You cannot ask for accountability if those who should ask for the responsibility don't know about it. I also think that governments could do things like, I appointed an ambassador for climate and security, and if you pinpoint a person on a high level, then things happen. It sounds like an easy thing, but it's actually quite effective. So I would also promote that.
get what you meant when you said that you disagree with Lučka on this point that not enough is happening, because you're really pointing out like the progress that we've made, but on the other hand I get your point as well, say okay, but the real action on the ground is what has to be more intense maybe.
Actually, climate diplomacy should be working much more, because to be honest, we cannot solve climate crisis between, for instance, US and China. Don't speak about that today. As long as they are sitting on two separate tables, this Europe alone cannot do much. Even in Brazil and developing countries help. So I guess climate diplomacy has failed, I guess, last. And also, without Russia, we cannot solve climate crisis. So I guess it's either we work together as a human society, or otherwise I don't see how to succeed. And also, the elephant in the room that is always present, is it possible to solve climate crisis with the same economic model we are using? Because we are imposing the same economic model of growth to Africa and developing countries. We cannot solve this crisis with the same mechanism that we created it in a way. So much more has to be done. I know I'm talking maybe as a scientist, or maybe I'm naive, but we have to tackle this, because otherwise we'll be running in circles like what, in my opinion, we are doing for years. So this is the challenge, I guess, that diplomats and strategic forums has, how to bring people on the table, and not just because of climate change, because we're talking about climate change recent years, but in Stockholm Institute it was developed the concept of planetary boundaries. We have more problems than just climate change. We have a problem of the diversity, biodiversity that is actually declining even faster than climate quality, and probably we have to, and also problem of the land use in general, because we have to produce more food for the people that are coming. We have still problems with that, if you ask me. And how to tackle all this together, this is what is missing in my view. But for sure, separate views, or that's why we have UN system, I guess. We have, this is what it was created. The people sit on the same table and take meaningful decisions. That's why I meant that COVID was a distraction, but okay, COVID was maybe not politically motivated, but wars that are presently going on are. And also it's not just about war with missiles, it's also the trade wars that are going on. We should not, trade war between China and US is something that's also causing problems and hindering technological development. We're not even, and one thing I would like also to mention that is not helping, and I don't know how to address it from the point of diplomacy or strategic forums, is also that we are still having climate change skeptics. In many countries, the right-wing governments, they still deny climate change. Also in Slovenia, we have parties that say it's normal, it's a cycle. Yeah. Come on, what cycle? So these are issues that they're unpleasant, I know, nobody wants to deal with that, but otherwise climate change will just go on.
You raised some tough questions here, which would deserve panels on their own.
Yeah, I know.
Model, for example. Yeah, but this exactly. I promise that we are going to involve the audience as well. So please feel free. I mean, this last question is really something I would like to address here as well. Yeah, how do we cope also with skepticism in our own countries? Yeah, and then maybe you can already prepare, and of course,
No, I'd like just to give an example of what we can do each country. For instance, the Brazilian government has also just put in place a new growth acceleration program, because we need development. We have to feed the people and things like that. This new plan, the program, comprises investments of around $350 billion US. And it's a plan that includes an ecological transition plan also. So you have the acceleration of the growth, but in this transition ecological plan that will help Brazil to meet its commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and will be based on sustainable finance, circular economy, technological density, bioeconomy, energy transition, and adaptation to climate change. So we have the scientists who gave the diagnosis. We have some examples, good examples of development and growth with sustainable energy. For instance, Brazil is one example of that because we have a clean energy all over the country. And also, the plan has to include actions in education, in social protection, in training the people. So if you try to work and to use our action to exchange best practice that we already put in place with results and work more in cooperation, I think we can and have to go around in the direction of solve these problems. We have to, don't have time to spare in this question.
That's true. So we had the first intervention here, then Sonia here. Did I miss anybody?
Thank you very much. I'm Niels from University of Ljubljana, and would like to comment a bit what politicians do or have done in recent decades. Too little, too late. And I remember, for example, my international organization had a conference in Brazil, in Bahia, in 2001, and there were plenty of papers about deforestation in Amazon. So science knows all these, and it is not only Amazon, it is similar story in Africa, in Asia, Indonesia, for example. And after 30 years, what has changed? Some days ago, American Republicans, candidates for election for president had discussions, and between, no, you can add Trump also, you had 8 candidates and only one with probably minor chances to win answer that climate change is real. It means that 7 of 8 candidates of major party in United States deny climate change. And now, if I add demographic situation in the world, then this too little, too late becomes much more important, because we will have in 20, 30 years from now 10 billion people, and in the last 130 years, if you take this time period, you will see that human population increased 5 times. In 1930, there were 2 billion population in the world. And in 130, approximately, there will be 10 billion. And everybody would like to live like in Europe and United States. But degrowth, is degrowth solution?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then
Yeah.
you have conflicts and Ukraine conflicts, and in the future you will have even more conflicts. So I think politicians should find more viable solution, and as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think we all agree on this. I mean, this is something I wanted to say, but of course, what we hadn't done in the last 20, 30 years, we can't change now, but we really have to make a lot more progress starting from now on. But it's really the whole question about degrowth. Yeah, it's a highly disputed one, but for example, you talked about circular economy as well, Maria Laura. Yeah, this is also part of a solution here, and I think also something where we need more cooperation and exchange. Yeah. Sonja?
Thank you very much for your input, Sonja Schembeck from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Office for Croatia and Slovenia. I would like to invite the panelists to explore one more aspect of the possible apocalypse tomorrow, and that is the link between climate crisis and political instability within our countries. Because I think what we all see now, and thank you also, Linde, for pointing that out, is that the climate crisis is also a social crisis. It is deepening social gaps. And people who are frightened or deprived tend usually to vote for more extreme parties. So I would like to hear from you whether you share this fear, also that basically the climate crisis could also be one puzzle in undermining really our democratic systems. And if you agree with this analysis, what should we do against it?
$1 million question, yeah, I think it's absolutely opportune to address this like in the last 10 minutes. So who want to?
Well, thank you very much. To start with Sonja's question here, you could see it very much, for example, in the Swedish election. It was roughly a year ago, and some of the scientists now call it the gasoline election, because the especially populist party promised that every liter of gasoline should be €1 cheaper if they won. And of course everybody wanted to have it, and then they spent €3 billion to pay back for high energy, and the price got 5 cents cheaper. And now the prices of gasoline is higher than it was at the election. But it was very easy to, if you were a populist party, to get people to say, yes, I don't want to pay more for my gasoline, and now it's also the pressure. Unfortunately, it has been successful to take away environmental support, and also to not try to reduce the fossil fuels. And this happened in country after country, and sometimes I think that yes, the scientists, they say, oh, with the alarm bells, but what do you as scientists do? Not to get the populist party and those parties who don't want to do anything for environment not to win the elections. You have to be out there as well, and to say, okay, if you vote for this, this will be the consequence. You vote for this, that will be the consequences. But the neutrality here could be in both ways. Yes, you should be a neutral scientist, but then don't complain. And I mean, I would say another thing when it comes to United States. Yes, you can say what the gentleman here said about the Republican, but you can also turn it around. I mean, it's called the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, but what it is that Biden has done is an enormous climate and environmental reform package with billions and billions and billions to make the industry more climate friendly, We have the same thing in Sweden, where we now are, it's possible, and they have already succeeded to make steel with no coal. They make steel with water, hybrid. And that will reduce the emission with roughly 30%. And that is because of public-private partnership. You give tax reduction and whatever, so that the companies actually could invest in this. It's enormous potential for it. But then of course you have to have politicians who also believe in it. And you can also see how much politics means. When we had the Trump administration, we have an Arctic Council. The first time in the history of the Arctic Council, the Trump administration stopped the final document because they didn't want to have one single word about climate and environment in the final final paper. So there was not. Then the new administration say we have a total other view on climate and environment, and now we have a quite strong final document from the Arctic Council. So politics can make all the difference. But then we of course have to have politicians who believe in it and to think that there is something that we can do. And I definitely think there is something we can do.
Niels, you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, almost everything that I wanted to say was addressed for you, and I thank you for that. I really think, and we have that title for that discussion, the apocalypse. And that's rightly so, to make the point. But if that is our message, we will lose. And I'm from the socialist movement. I'm a social democrat. I'm always happy to have a programmatic debate about the character of capitalism. But what I think is that there are instruments in the system that are already helping us to get back on track, and it's our responsibility to lay the groundwork with legislation, with sufficient funding, with international cooperation, and we need to address the fear of people in our democracies that our climate agenda is endangering their prosperity and job security. And I think that's true for the industrialized countries. I think it's true for every country on this planet. And if you don't address the social issues, then you maybe end up with a party like the current day Republican Party, although I know that there are still sane Republicans, but who don't have some momentum right now. But that's a lesson for us. So I think civil society and the scientific community, of course there is a role to push us, to criticize us, to make our results better. But it would be too simple to say the politicians need to do this or that. We can only work in the political space that society is opening for us. And that's why in my country we are investing billions in social transition. Because those regions that are going to fade out of coal, and there are regions in Germany who have no alternative to coal. That's where we, by law, will transmit billions of euros in the next years to create new jobs, to address the concern and to show that there's prosperity in that entire new world of producing and the new world of mobility and living together. So, yes, I'm as concerned as all of you are, but our message needs to be a positive message. Otherwise, we are going to lose. And I think exactly as what you said. I mean, political decisions can make a real difference. We saw that with President Lula, who already reduced the velocity of deforestation in just a couple of months. Are we there yet? No. We need to cooperate and do the right decisions. But if you see how, again in my country, investment decisions by the private sector are being taken. I mean, the German car industry is crucial for prosperity in my country. They were very, very late to the game. And we have now a Tesla production plant in Germany. So they are investing billions of euros. So yeah, there are all the points that you mentioned. But we still have the support also for what Chancellor Scholz announced, that from 2025 onwards, we will invest 6 billion annually for international climate financing and addressing what you said, including 1.5 billion to biodiversity. So yes, I also wanted to make that point.
One comment, I'm coming from university as well, so what politicians can do, and it's the cheapest thing to do, is to change educational system. That children in the primary school will learn about climate change, because there are very few curriculums in Europe even that will be systematically teaching children of the circumstances of the future. So they would understand how climate change works, how the planet works, and then we will also solve the problem of climate change skepticism and all these crazy things that people believe. So this is something I'm missing, and it should be vertically, not just primary school, but also the university. And it wouldn't harm, even when you are selected in election as an MP, before you start your function, usually is 4 or 5 months. Why not go to school then? We can call it climate diplomacy or whatever. But basic facts about things you will decide for the next 4 years. This is the cheapest, fastest way forward, I guess. And this is what politicians can do, because science cannot do it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, we wanted to come up with positive initiatives, examples here on the panel. But of course, what Niels mentioned, I think this is a real challenge, yeah, and especially for progressive forces here, to not only pointing or picturing this apocalypse there on the wall and then say, oh, but let's try super hard that it doesn't come true. We need some kind of a new positive narrative, yeah, and I think this is true like in the global south as well, because there are also people who fear that they might lose out from this ecological transition, for example, when it comes to local communities at sites where resources are extracted, etc.
No, politician has to act. Now we finished this event in Amazonia with a very important movement with civil society, because the meeting was the 8 countries, Amazonian countries, and the countries invited, but we worked with more than 30,000 people making from the civil society, indigenous people, and asking for the politicians what they want. And so they were organized, and they present to the presidents for the region their wills, and this model will be bring by the President Lula in the presidents of the G20, for instance, and we create some movement to bring to the COP this year and the other ones, and the COP 30 will be in Brazil. All this model put together, the civil society, the science, and the politicians, to discuss and to present action, but with money and with the programs, and above all with inclusion, because it's the most important thing.
This is a very nice ending point, and thanks a lot to the panel. I have to say, at least with me, you succeeded in that I'm leaving here feeling quite encouraged and positive, and that's really not always the case. Sometimes in our work, I'm really also feeling a bit overwhelmed by the magnitude of the challenge we have ahead of us, but I think it's really so important to stay focused on the positive things and not even to avoid risks, etc., but also what we did here as well, I think, to point out the additional positive outcomes this might, for example, have. This whole fight against climate change might also have like social justice, if we treat this as 2 sides of the same coin. So thanks a lot also to the audience, and I think we are up then now for the final remarks of our hosts here for this very impressive